All right, grab a seat and let's get right into it. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for this STS exam preparation masterclass. Look, I've been a site superintendent and safety leader for, well, over 25 years now. I've seen the good, the bad, and the outright ugly out there on the dirt. And while getting your safety trained supervisor certification is a fantastic boost for your resume, you and I both know our real goal here. It's making absolutely sure that every single person on our crew goes home safe to their families at the end of the shift. That's the job. The rest is just details.
So I want to kick things off by asking you a really straightforward question. Why are we actually getting this STS certification? This explainer isn't about teaching you how to memorize some dusty manual or lug around a heavy binder full of rules that, let's be honest, nobody reads anyway. It's about stepping up as real frontline safety leaders. The Board of Certified Safety Professionals, or BCSP, they designed this credential specifically for supervisors, managers, and tradespeople who are handling safety right alongside their primary operational roles. We're the ones making the tough calls in the field. We are moving past the paperwork and getting right into real-world application. So, here is our toolbox talk for this session. We're going to hit domain 1 hard, moving from paper to practice, running a site orientation that actually works, treating JSAs as living documents, investigating to fix problems, and finally, fitness for duty checks. Okay, number 1, from paper to practice. Let's do a quick blueprint reality check.
The exam is evolving, and frankly, our job sites are too. Straight from the official BSCSP blueprint, Domain 1, which is Safety Program Implementation and Management, makes up exactly 15% of the new 2026 exam. This domain is the absolute bedrock of your site's safety culture. It's testing your ability to take a corporate safety program from the office and actually make it work on the ground. If you don't nail this 15%, the rest of the safety structure on your site is literally going to crumble.
Because there is a massive, massive difference between paper safety and a real safety culture. I've seen way too many supervisors who think their job is totally done because they checked a few boxes on a clipboard in the trailer and blew the dust off a binder that hasn't seen the light of day since 1998. That, my friends, is a paper program. A real safety culture, which is exactly what the STS certification is testing you on, is driven by active, hands-on mentorship out in the field. It's about giving your crew actual stop work authority and making sure they feel comfortable enough to use it. It's about walking the walk every single day. Moving on to 2, site orientation that works. This is our first tactical pillar.
The core elements you need to hit here are pretty simple. Setting clear expectations, identifying site-specific hazards, explaining the emergency procedures, and communicating your hazard controls. Let me share a quick story from a job site a few years back. We had a new guy come on, and instead of just sticking him in a dark room to watch some cheesy safety tape from 20 years ago, we actually walked him through the physical site. We physically showed him exactly where the muster points were, we pointed out the real blind spots around the heavy equipment, and we introduced him to the crew. Doing a proper hands-on orientation completely sets the tone for a worker's entire time on your site. For the exam, you need to understand that orientation is a proactive hazard control. It is not just an HR checkbox.
All right, 3, living JSAs. Tactical pillar number 2. Picture how a JSA actually flows on your site. It's a simple 3-step thought process. First, you break down the tasks step by step. Second, you identify the specific hazards tied to each of those steps. And third, you implement controls to mitigate those exact hazards. As a supervisor, your entire job here is to guide your crew through this process before anyone even thinks about picking up a single tool. You are mapping out the danger long before it ever happens. I want you to burn this into your brain. A JSA isn't just morning paperwork. It's your game plan for the entire shift. Here is a huge pro tip for both the exam and the field. Examiners want to see that you use JSAs for continuous improvement. Think about it. If it starts pouring rain at noon or a brand new piece of heavy equipment rolls into your work zone, your JSA from 7 a.m., it's completely out of date. It has to be a breathing document that shifts the exact moment your site conditions change. If it just sits folded up in your back pocket all day, it's useless. Number 4, investigating to actually fix problems. Tactical pillar 3. Let's walk through what a real incident timeline looks like. In the immediate seconds after an incident, your only focus is first response, getting medical attention and stopping the immediate hazard. Then, within minutes, your job as a supervisor shifts to securing the scene, so vital evidence isn't messed with. Over the next few hours, you gather facts. You're snapping photos, drawing sketches, and interviewing witnesses right then and there while their memories are still fresh. And finally, over the next few days, you compile the final report. The STS exam expects you to know exactly how to take absolute control of a scene from that first chaotic response all the way through to the final paperwork. Now, the absolute most crucial point of any investigation, and I can't stress this enough, is this. We are trying to find the root cause, not just look for someone to blame. Why do we investigate at all? We do it to drive real improvement. If a guy trips over a cord and gets hurt, and your investigation just says worker was clumsy, well, you failed. Why was the cord there in the first place? Was there a lack of wall outlets? Did we fail to provide cord covers? We investigate to fix the root cause so the next crew coming in on the next shift doesn't make that exact same mistake.
5. Fitness for duty. Tactical Pillar 4. You're going to want to pay close attention here because this is a brand new addition to the STS5 blueprint. The exam now specifically tests your ability to observe your workers' fitness for duty and refer them when necessary. Keep a sharp eye out for these key indicators: extreme fatigue, signs of illness, substance use, and severe mental distraction. Let's just talk supervisor to supervisor for a second. This is the human element of our job. Identifying these signs in your crew is just as critical as spotting a frayed extension cord or a missing guardrail. A worker who is severely sleep deprived or may be heavily distracted by a major crisis at home is a literal physical hazard to themselves and every single person working around them.
Look, making the tough calls protects your crew. Pulling a guy off the line because he just isn't fit for duty today is, without a doubt, one of the toughest calls you will ever have to make as a leader. It can be incredibly uncomfortable, but it is exactly what the BCSP expects from a certified safety professional. You are there to protect them, even when it means having a really difficult conversation. So to wrap up Domain 1, wrap your head around this breakdown. As we've been discussing, safety program implementation and management is 15% of the exam. The other 85%, that's largely dedicated to hazard awareness, hazard controls, and life-critical activities. So while building the safety program is only 15% of the battle, it sets up absolutely everything else we do out there on the site. It is the solid foundation that holds the rest of it up. And I want to leave you with this final thought. Management literally means nothing if we can't see the dangers right in front of us. We've got the safety program in place. We know exactly how to orient our people, write rock-solid JSAs, investigate incidents the right way, and check for fitness for duty. But ask yourself this: if you walked out of your trailer right now, how many fatal blind spots are sitting out there on your dirt just waiting to happen? It's time to step out of the office and into the field. Let's keep this momentum going and dive straight into how we identify and lock down those specific physical site hazards next.
All right, so we've built a solid safety program and written out our JSAs back in the trailer. Now it's time to step out into the mud, grab our hard hats, and actually spot these hazards in real time. This is where the rubber meets the road for any supervisor. Welcome right back to our STS exam blueprint explainer.
Now, looking at the new 2026 STS5 blueprint, Domain 2 focuses exclusively on hazard awareness. And here's a quick reality check for you. It makes up a massive 20% of your exam. That means a fifth of your entire grade is based on your ability to walk around out there on the dirt and recognize exactly what could kill your crew. The folks grading the exam over at the BCSP, they know spotting hazards isn't just theory. It's literally the core of your job.
So here are our Domain 2 survival tools. We're going to cover safety inspection procedures and corrections, stop work authority, identifying hazards in your documentation, safety audits, and finally, motor vehicle safety procedures. Let's get right to work. I want you to imagine walking the job site with me right now. Heavy iron is moving, materials are flying overhead, crews are busting their humps. As a supervisor, you can't just be staring down at the schedule or glued to your phone. You need your head on a swivel to spot what can hurt your crew, taking those textbook concepts and translating them into real-world hazard recognition. You know, a lot of green supervisors think just spotting a frayed extension cord sitting in a puddle is the whole job. Well, it's not. You got to spot it, document your findings, and then step 3, which is absolutely the most critical: coordinate the corrective action. Think about it. If you write down that a trench lacks proper shoring, but you don't actually pull your guys out of the hole to fix it, you haven't managed safety at all. You've just documented a future accident. Because here's what I've seen over the years. When you miss hazards, you breed a totally reactive culture. You end up constantly putting out fires, dealing with compliance failures, and watching incident rates climb. But when you catch those hazards early, you build a proactive culture. Your work sites get safer, and those early catches feed right back into improving your JSAs. Your paperwork actually becomes a living, breathing document based on what you're really finding out there in the mud. Now, I literally cannot stress this next point enough. Stop work authority, or SWA, is a supervisor's most critical right and responsibility. If you see an imminent danger, You have the absolute authority and honestly the moral obligation to shut that work down immediately. On my sites, this is non-negotiable. You do it without fear of reprisal, without worrying about the daily schedule, and definitely without second-guessing yourself.
The formal exam definition actually uses a really specific, powerful word: empowerment. It's the empowerment of all workers to halt work when a perceived unsafe condition or behavior might result in an unwanted event. Using this tool confidently and correctly is exactly what separates a good safety program on paper from a great one out in the real world. If a laborer stops a concrete pour because they spotted a rigging failure, you walk over, shake their hand, fix the hazard, and thank them for saving a life. All right, let's pivot for a second to a brand new addition to the STS5 blueprint. We've talked a lot about physical hazards, but you also need to know how to identify hazards based on documentation. That's right, hazards hiding in plain sight, sitting right there in the paperwork on your desk or tablet. You don't always have to be walking the steel to find a critical risk. A massive part of hazard awareness happens before a single tool is ever lifted. For example, if you review a safety data sheet, you might uncover some unrecognized chemical exposure limits for a new solvent. If you look at an old JSA, you might find outdated or incorrect procedures that totally don't match your current site conditions. And checking training logs, you might catch an expired operator certification. And let me tell you, an uncertified guy sitting in a 50-ton crane is just as deadly as a missing guardrail. To keep all this straight, you really need to understand how these tools fit into the natural rhythm of a superintendent's work week. Your JSA is created early in the planning phase. Your daily inspections, those happen right at shift start. A safety audit, though, is a more formal, comprehensive review you might conduct monthly just to check the overall system. And then incident investigations happen post-event. Understanding this flow proves you know how proactive spotting feeds directly back into managing the site. I want to pause here for a second and ask you a critical question. It's one that seasoned superintendents just know in their bones. Where do most construction fatalities actually happen? You're probably thinking falls from scaffolding or trench collapses or electrocutions. And yeah, those are absolutely major hazards for sure. But there is a silent killer on busy job sites that newer supervisors overlook way too often. It's motor vehicle and fleet safety. This is the final piece of Domain 2. We're talking about heavy iron, delivery trucks, pickups, and forklifts, all moving around a congested, noisy, and usually muddy construction site. The interaction between these massive pieces of moving equipment and your workers on foot is incredibly dangerous. And managing that chaos, well, that falls squarely on your shoulders. Effective fleet management on site means you're ensuring heavy equipment is inspected daily before the keys even turn. It means actively managing site traffic, setting up dedicated walking paths, and absolutely demanding spotters when equipment is backing up. You also have to verify operators' certifications. Never just take a guy's word for it. Check the log yourself. And monitor those vehicle maintenance logs. If the backup alarm on a dump truck is broken and hasn't been fixed, well, that is a prime stop work authority moment right there. So, moving from awareness to action. Mastering this domain means you've built strong, proactive hazard recognition habits. You know exactly how to read the paperwork for hidden dangers, you know how to manage the chaos of fleet traffic, and you know exactly when to execute your stop work authority to protect your crew. Doing all of this right doesn't just make you a boss, it makes you a true leader out on the site.
But I want to leave you with this million-dollar question. Once you've actually identified a hazard on your walk, documented it, and stopped the work, how do you go about permanently eliminating that risk? How do you engineer it out so it never, ever threatens your crew again? Keep that provocative thought in the back of your mind because that is exactly what we're going to tackle as we transition straight into our next section on hazard and risk control.
All right, so we just wrapped up how to spot a hazard. But let me tell you something. After 25 years out in the dirt as a site superintendent, finding hazards is totally useless if you don't actually control them. Welcome back to the Masterclass, everyone. We are picking right up from our last lesson and moving into the real meat of the job, taking action. So let's dive right in. Hazard ID without control is just a list of ways to get hurt. I absolutely love this quote. Delivering this piece of job site wisdom is exactly how I start every single safety meeting with my new supervisors. Moving from just being aware of a hazard to actually mitigating that risk, well, that is where a supervisor earns their paycheck. If you just document a bad trench or an exposed wire on your clipboard and then walk away, you haven't managed safety at all. You've literally just taken notes on an upcoming accident.
And hey, the exam writers, they know exactly how important this is. The absolutely crucial number you need to remember here is 42%. That is a massive chunk of your 2026 STS exam blueprint. Domain 3, which is hazard controls, makes up 20%, and Domain 6, life-critical activities, makes up another 22%. If you can master what we are covering today, you are nearly halfway to passing that exam.
Okay, let's get into Section 1, the hierarchy of controls. This right here is your primary playbook for systematically mitigating job site risks. Look, if you take nothing else away from my years of experience, take this. You need a systematic approach to fixing problems. You cannot just guess out there. So walk down this pyramid with me. Step 1 is elimination, physically removing the hazard entirely. That is always the ultimate goal. Step 2 is substitution, maybe swapping out a toxic chemical for a safer one. Step 3 is engineering controls, which means physically isolating people from the hazard. Step 4 is administrative controls, meaning you're changing how people actually work. And finally, Step 5, all the way at the bottom, is PPE, personal protective equipment. Defaulting straight to PPE is the weakest move a supervisor can make. If you just hand a guy some safety glasses without trying to eliminate the flying debris first, you aren't controlling the hazard, you're just hoping that cheap plastic holds up. So, let's look at the difference when we actually use engineering controls instead of just throwing administrative rules at the field. The STS exam blueprint specifically tests you on machine safeguarding and continuous job safety analysis, or JSA, processes. Here is the big difference. An engineering control, like a physical guard on a saw or a sturdy guardrail on a leading edge, does not rely on a worker's memory. It is a physical barrier. An administrative control, on the other hand, like updating a JSA or putting up a warning sign, relies entirely on human behavior. And let's be real, humans get tired, they get rushed, and they make mistakes. Always push for the physical safeguard first. Moving right along to Section 2, locking out hazardous energy. This falls under Domain 6, life-critical activities, which accounts for that huge 22% of the exam we talked about. We are talking about the stuff that, if it goes sideways, someone is not going home to their family. Here is the exact exam terminology you need to know. Isolation of hazardous energy. Out in the field, we commonly know this as lockout/tagout, or LOTO. It is the specific practices and procedures to safeguard employees from the unexpected energization or startup of machinery and equipment. Burn this definition into your brain so you immediately recognize it on test day. It's not just about flipping a switch, it is about absolute physical isolation. Look, I've seen LOTO fail in the field, and it's almost always because somebody was in a rush. Check out these common failures. Trusting someone else's lock. Big mistake. Every man working on that equipment needs his own personal lock, period. Failing to bleed off pressurized systems? Stored energy will get you just as fast as active electrical energy will. Skipping the try-step, lock, tag, and try to turn it on to verify it's actually dead. And finally, relying on a flimsy administrative tag instead of a physical engineering lock. As a supervisor, if you see a crew rushing through energy isolation, you step in and shut it down immediately. Next up, Section 3. Navigating confined spaces safely. This is another major life-critical hazard where you, as a safety-trained supervisor, must execute strict control. The risks in these spaces compound incredibly fast. Let's break down this core definition together. A confined space is an area large enough for an employee to enter, it has limited means of entry or exit, and, crucially, it is not designed for continuous human occupancy. I always tell my young supers, just because a worker physically can fit inside a tank, a vault, or a trench absolutely does not mean it's safe to work in. So how do we actually control this practically, without bringing job site production to an unnecessary standstill? Well, here are your non-negotiables. Always assess for hazardous atmospheres first. We are going to talk more about atmospheres later on, but bad air is a silent killer. Verify your entry permits are complete and visibly posted at the entrance. Ensure the continuous improvement process of your JSA actually reflects the current real-time conditions. Say it starts raining, well, the trench conditions change, and that JSA must change too. And finally, never, ever let a hole watch or attendant leave their post. Not for a coffee, not for a tool, no exceptions. All right, Section 4, Fall Protection and Scaffolding. Now we are tackling fall hazards, ladder safety protocols, and hoisting risks. These are everyday realities on a construction site, and frankly, they're where we see the most complacency. Let me ask you a question, and I want you to really think about it. Why do we always default to throwing a harness on a guy? Think back to our hierarchy of controls we just covered. A harness is personal protective equipment. It's at the very bottom of the pyramid. It doesn't actually stop the fall, it just stops the guy from hitting the concrete. Why are we relying on PPE instead of just building a proper guardrail or erecting secure scaffolding? Here's some direct, boots-on-the-ground field guidance to help fix that mindset. First, prioritize passive engineering controls like guardrails. Why? Because they protect everyone automatically without anyone having to remember to clip in. Second, inspect ladder safety protocols daily. Ladders take a massive beating on site and they fail when you least expect it. Third, assess the risks associated with hoisting and rigging. Dropped loads are just as deadly as a falling worker. And finally, if you absolutely must use PPE, verify that those fall protection systems are actually tied off to rated anchors. I literally can't tell you how many times I've walked a site and seen guys tied off to a PVC pipe. That is a supervisor failure right there. Let's wrap this up with Section 5, Balancing Safety and Production. A truly great safety-trained supervisor knows that rigorous risk control doesn't have to kill your schedule. In fact, doing it right the first time keeps the job moving. Let's talk through this chart like we are leaning on the tailgate of my truck looking at a set of prints. Look at trenching. A weak control is just yelling at your crews to stay back. That distracts everyone and slows down the work. A strong control, installing proper shoring and physical barriers. Once it's engineered, the guys can just focus on laying the pipe, not staring at the dirt above them. Same exact thing with machine guarding. Putting up a warning sign is weak. Installing an engineered machine safeguard means the operator can work faster and with total confidence. And for electrical? Relying entirely on PPE is a recipe for a slowdown. Full physical isolation of that energy means the crew can get in there and work without constantly looking over their shoulder. As you can see, engineering controls actually keep the job moving smoother.
So, what does your actual daily execution look like? It's right here. You consistently apply the hierarchy of controls, always aiming for the top of that pyramid. You update the JSA as conditions inevitably change on the ground. You have the guts to execute Stop Work Authority, or SWA, when those life-critical rules like LOTO or confined space are broken. And you maintain accurate safety documentation for compliance. Let me tell you, mastering these tasks not only gets you that passing score on the STS exam, but it genuinely saves lives on your crew.
And speaking of maintaining your edge, take a quick look at this number, 30. Once you pass this exam, keeping your STS certification active requires 30 hours of safety training for recertification every 5 years. Continuous learning isn't just an annoying requirement, it's part of being a true professional in this industry. Things change, standards update, and you really need to stay sharp. So, we've walked through how to control the physical risks, the falls, the open trenches, the massive machinery. We've properly locked out the energy. Look at this final question. What about the hazards you can't see, the ones you breathe in, or the chemicals that absorb right into your skin? That leads us perfectly into our next module covering Domain 4, Basic Industrial Hygiene, where we are going to tackle the biological, airborne, and chemical hazards that are every bit as deadly as a physical fall. Stick around, you definitely won't want to miss it. All right, let's jump right back into it. We just wrapped up a pretty heavy session on hazard and risk control, where we focused a lot on the visible threats on our job sites. But listen, as a supervisor who spent over 25 years running crews, I can tell you right now, the stuff you absolutely cannot see is often what's going to keep you up at night. We're shifting gears here. We're moving from those visible safety hazards we just talked about controlling over to the invisible health threats that can completely sneak up on your crew. Welcome to Domain 4 of our STS exam preparation masterclass, Basic Industrial Hygiene. To kick this off, we need to make a crystal clear distinction between safety hazards and health hazards. Safety hazards, your falls, your cuts, a guy getting struck by a swinging load, those hurt workers today, right? The damage is immediate and you can see the blood. But health hazards, things like inhaling silica dust, chronic exposure to solvents, or that slow, progressive hearing loss, man, those can quietly destroy a worker's health years, even decades down the line. I've literally seen guys retire only to spend their golden years hooked up to oxygen tanks simply because we didn't respect health hazards back in the day. As a modern safety-trained supervisor, you have to actively hunt for both. And trust me, the exam makers know exactly how important this is. If you look at the STS blueprint, Domain 4, Basic Industrial Hygiene, makes up exactly 12% of your exam. That means mastering these concepts, it's absolutely non-negotiable if you want to pass. And it's not just about memorizing textbook terms, it's about knowing how to apply them out there in the dirt every single day. Section 1, the 4 core health hazards. Let's get into it.
So let's break down exactly what we're looking for out there. There are 4 main categories of workplace health hazards you're going to be expected to recognize the second you step foot on a site. Now, these often look completely ordinary until you categorize them.
We've got chemical, physical, biological, and ergonomic. Chemical hazards are your solvents, the silica dust from cutting concrete, or carbon monoxide from running a gas generator indoors. Biological hazards, think mold in a damp basement reno, bloodborne pathogens if there's an accident, or even just local wildlife and ticks. Ergonomic hazards are those awkward lifting postures and repetitive motions. But let me share a quick story about physical hazards. Early in my career, I had a rookie foreman completely overlook the physical toll of a guy running a heavy jackhammer all week. He just didn't think about the continuous vibration. Well, by Friday, the guy's hands were numb, his grip was completely shot, and his back was ruined for a month. It is so incredibly easy to miss ergonomic strains and physical vibrations until the damage is already done. You've got to anticipate them.
Section 2. Chemical routes of entry.
Okay, so you need to understand how these invisible hazards actually breach your workers' defenses. In the field, we call these the routes of entry, and there are 4 you absolutely need to memorize. Step 1 is inhalation, just breathing in toxic dust or vapors. Step 2 is absorption, getting chemicals directly on the skin. Step 3 is ingestion, eating or drinking contaminated particles. And step 4 is injection, getting a puncture or cut from a contaminated nail or tool. Let me put this in plain supervisor speak for a second. Most job site poisonings happen when a worker inhales a hazardous atmosphere because nobody bothered to check the ventilation. Or, honestly, when a guy forgets to wash his hands before eating his sandwich at lunch and ingests a mouthful of lead dust. It's the simple stuff that gets you.
Section 3. Understanding job site speed limits, PELs and TLVs. Now that we know how the bad stuff gets in, we have to talk about how much is too much. To protect your crew, you got to know the hard numbers of what their bodies can actually handle. I like to call these our job site speed limits. First up is the PEL, the permissible exposure limit. This is the maximum legal enforceable concentration of a hazardous substance a worker can be exposed to. Think of the PEL as the absolute legal speed limit on the highway. If you cross this line, you are breaking the law, you're going to get cited, and much more importantly, you are putting your crew in immediate, documented danger. But here's where veteran supervisors do things a little differently. We don't just look at the PEL, we look at the TLV, the threshold limit value. This is a recommended guideline. It represents the level under which nearly all workers can be repeatedly exposed, day in and day out, without adverse health effects. While TLVs are recommendations and not strictly enforceable laws, the best supers treat the TLV as their true safety buffer. Look, you wouldn't drive 65 miles per hour on black ice just because the speed limit sign says 65, right? No, you slow down. The TLV is how we make sure nobody goes home sick.
And this actually illustrates a core mentoring philosophy I try to pass down to every new foreman on my sites. If you're consistently bumping right up against the PEL, you are not managing safety, you're just managing liability. Aim for the TLV. Top-tier, safety-trained supervisors don't just rely on doing the bare minimum for compliance. They actively put controls in place to keep those exposures as far below the legal limit as humanly possible.
Section 4. Air sampling and ventilation basics.
So how do we actually prove we're under those limits? Well, here is your practical industrial hygiene toolkit. These are the methods a supervisor uses to measure and control these airborne and chemical hazards in the real world. First off, conduct exposure assessments early. Don't wait until it gets super dusty to guess what's in the air. Perform air sampling for hazardous atmospheres proactively. Next, lean heavy on the hierarchy of controls, which we covered back in Domain 3. This means you implement local exhaust ventilation first. Capturing dust right at the grinder with mechanical ventilation is always better than just slapping a respirator on a worker. Issuing personal protective equipment like respirators, that should only ever be your absolute last resort when engineering controls just aren't cutting it.
Section 5. Surviving extreme site climates.
Now, I want to shift focus to one of the most common yet deadly physical health hazards on literally any construction site: temperature extremes. Climate exposure is serious business. On one side, you have heat stress, which cascades from simple dehydration into heat exhaustion and ultimately into life-threatening heat stroke. On the flip side, cold stress brings frostbite, hypothermia, and a massive reduction in manual dexterity. I'll tell you from personal experience. I once had a guy working on a roof in the middle of July. He looked perfectly fine, but within a 10-minute window, he completely stopped sweating, got confused, and collapsed from heat stroke. We caught it fast enough to cool him down, but if we hadn't been actively watching him, he would have died. Monitoring climate exposure is a daily active supervisory duty. It is not a seasonal suggestion.
Which brings me to this rule of thumb. A good supervisor doesn't just watch the work, they watch the workers. When the temperature spikes or plummets, your crew's behavior is going to tell you way more than the thermometer ever will. Are they slurring their words? Are they shivering uncontrollably? Are they taking dangerous, stupid shortcuts just because they want to get out of the cold? This ties right back into Domain 1. Observing your workers' fitness for duty requires active, vigilant leadership on the ground. You cannot lead your crew from an air-conditioned trailer.
Look, we spend all our time trying to proactively identify and control these health and safety hazards. We set up the ventilation, we monitor the heat, we train the crew, right? But I want to leave you with this question. What happens when the ventilation suddenly fails in a confined space? Or what happens when a worker actually does go down with severe heat stroke on your watch? Because when proactive industrial hygiene controls fail, the clock starts ticking. And that perfectly sets up our next module, where we're going to dive straight into Domain 5, Emergency Preparedness and Management. Stay focused, and I'll see you in the next section.
All right, so we just wrapped up our deep dive into health hazards and basic industrial hygiene. And look, knowing those hazards, understanding the airborne exposures, and the physical risks we just covered, that is absolutely critical. But let me tell you, from my 25 years out on the job site, knowing the hazards is only half the battle. The glue that holds your entire safety program together, the thing that actually gets your crew home safe to their families at the end of the shift, is how you lead them. Okay, let's dive into this. You know the hazards, sure, but can you actually lead your crew through them? Honestly, answering yes to that question is exactly what separates the good supervisors from the truly great ones. Anybody can point at a missing guardrail or an unlabeled chemical bucket and quote the rule book, right? But can you look a 20-year veteran in the eye and correct their behavior without starting a massive shouting match? Can you motivate a green apprentice to actually speak up when something feels off? Your ability to lead, to communicate, and to foster real respect, that is exactly what the Board of Certified Safety Professionals is testing you on. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the massive shift we're seeing in the 2026 STS 5 blueprint, which really reflects day-to-day job site realities. The old Domain 6 used to be broadly focused on ethical leadership, but starting next year, that domain shifts directly to life-critical activities, making up 22% of your exam. The ethics and the leadership haven't disappeared. They've just become entirely practical. True leadership is now woven directly into how you handle life-critical stuff, like fall hazards, confined spaces, and emergency preparedness. It's no longer just textbook theory. It's about what you actually do when lives are quite literally on the line. They always say culture isn't what you say. It's what you tolerate on your job site. I want you to imagine your crew right now. Maybe it's a diverse group, guys from different trades, different backgrounds. Building a real safety culture doesn't happen just because you handed them a thick manual during orientation. It happens through daily, in-the-trenches coaching and mentoring. It happens when you empower your workers to use their stop work authority, or SWA, which, by the way, is a major focus in Domain 2 of the new exam. If you tolerate a sketchy shortcut just to save 10 minutes on a pour, you've just told your entire crew that the schedule matters more than their lives. Real leadership is enforcing the standard every single time. Now, a huge piece of Domain 1, that's safety program implementation and management, is exactly how you communicate. See how clear communication changes everything on site? We've all been in those brutal morning huddles where the super is just staring down at a clipboard, mumbling through a list of compliance boxes, while half the crew is basically asleep looking at their boots. As a safety-trained supervisor, you've got to ditch the clipboard and start having real conversations. The exam expects you to know how to implement safety programs effectively, and you absolutely cannot do that if your crew is tuning you out from minute one. Watch how a good safety meeting actually looks in practice compared to a bad one. A check-the-box meeting? That is a one-way street. It's boring, strictly compliance-focused, and frankly, a complete waste of everyone's time. But a high-impact safety sync, that's an interactive huddle. You're out there asking questions. You're confirming that your diverse, often multilingual teams actually understand the specific hazards for that specific shift. Think about it. If you have workers who speak English as a second language, just reading a complex safety data sheet out loud does absolutely nothing. A true leader ensures actual understanding, not just physical attendance. This right here, this is your daily playbook for making that safety communication actually stick. And one of the most critical things you're going to do, which, by the way, is a brand new explicit objective added to Domain 1 for the 2026 blueprint, is observing workers' fitness for duty. It is your job as a leader to look at your crew and know if someone is fatigued, impaired, or just not in the right headspace to operate heavy machinery, and you have to refer them when necessary. I've seen this playbook completely transform a crew. Years ago, I had a guy who constantly skirted the tie-off rules. Instead of just writing him up and walking away, I pulled him aside, resolved the conflict immediately, and explained the why, exactly how a fall would leave his family hanging. Clear, direct, human communication prevents violations before they even happen. So, the crucial point is strong leadership and rock-solid communication, they are absolutely your best tools for preventing accidents. But we all know that in construction and heavy industry, the absolute worst can still happen. When prevention fails or some unpredictable event occurs, your emergency plan is your one and only shield. That's exactly why Domain 5, Emergency Preparedness and Management, makes up a solid 11% of your exam and is so heavily tested.
The STS5 blueprint gets super specific here. When you're out there on site, you need to treat this like a mandatory field checklist running in the back of your head at all times. You must apply knowledge of routine emergency equipment inspections. Is that fire extinguisher actually charged? Is the eye wash station functioning, or is it blocked by a stack of pallets? You also need to know equipment emergency shutoff procedures inside and out. If a machine catches a worker's sleeve, does every single person on your crew know exactly where the kill switch is? A comprehensive emergency response plan requires all of this, from crystal clear evacuation routes to universal safety precautions and running those regular drills. Let's walk through exactly how this looks, because when an emergency happens, panic is your absolute worst enemy. And as the supervisor, all eyes are locked on you. Step 1, secure the immediate scene. You have to stop the bleeding, literally or figuratively, by isolating hazardous energy or stopping live traffic. Step 2, account for all personnel. You need a rock-solid headcount immediately. Step 3, communicate clearly with your team and your central command. And Step 4, assist the first responders when they arrive by giving them the facts, the safety data sheets, and clear site access. This exact 4-step sequence is how a true leader takes control of absolute chaos. And this brilliantly illustrates why this matters right now. March 1, 2026. That is when the STS5 blueprint officially goes live, bringing this highly refined focus on emergency equipment, shutoff procedures, and life-critical activities right along with it. Let me be clear, mastering these emergency procedures isn't just about passing a multiple-choice test. It is a mandatory requirement for your certification and a profound moral obligation to the men and women working under you. So I want you to really chew on this for a second. When things go sideways on your site, does your crew freeze up just waiting for you to tell them what to do? Or have you led them so well and trained them so thoroughly that they immediately start executing the emergency plan? That right there is the ultimate test of a safety-trained supervisor. Keep that in mind. Let's move to it and see how this builds. Because next, we're going to analyze the differences between the standard STS and the STSC construction variant to see exactly which path fits your specific job site experience. All right, we just wrapped up a deep dive into leadership and emergency preparedness. And after 25 years running job sites, I can tell you for a fact, knowing how to handle yourself when things go sideways is absolutely critical. But here is the next logical step in this explainer of our masterclass material. How do you actually make all that hard-earned safety leadership official? How do you prove to your company, to your clients, and most importantly to your crew that you hold the gold standard in supervisory safety? Well, that brings us right to our next topic, the certification crossroads. Look, you can be the absolute best superintendent, foreman, or field manager in the state. But when you're bidding on a big project or trying to move up the ladder, your resume needs to speak just as loudly as your job site reputation. Getting certified by the Board of Certified Safety Professionals, or BCSP, is exactly how you do that. But when you log in to apply, you're going to face a choice. And honestly, it's one I've seen trip up a lot of really good field leaders. You have got to choose the right credential for your specific environment. Section 1. The certification crossroads, STS versus STSC. Every supervisor hits this fork in the road. You're going to see two acronyms that look almost identical. But choosing the wrong one is literally like bringing a finish hammer to a demolition job. It's a great tool, sure, but it's just not going to do what you need it to do. On the left, we've got the STS, the Safety Trained Supervisor. Now, this is built for broad safety practices across any organization. On the right, the STSC, and that C is specifically for construction. I can't tell you how many times I've mentored sharp, young superintendents who mistakenly registered for the general STS when their boots are in the mud every single day. When you're managing a steel erection crew, you need a credential that tests you on the realities of the dirt and the steel. Section 2, the blueprint breakdown, inside the exams. Just like pouring a solid foundation, you got to know the structural requirements before you start mixing your concrete. Notice the synopsis of the new STS5 blueprint here, effective March 2026. The testing standards, well, they're evolving. They are shifting away from generic ethical leadership and moving heavily toward direct, high-hazard field interventions. They've added elements like evaluating a worker's fitness for duty and identifying hazards right from documentation. And why? Because as a supervisor, you don't just need abstract ethics, right?
You need to know if the guy running the bulldozer is actually fit to operate it today. And you need to be able to read a job safety analysis and instantly spot what's missing.
When you break down the 6 domains, you'll see standard elements like safety program implementation, hazard controls, and industrial hygiene making up the bulk of the foundation. But look closely at Domain 6. That is a massive 22% chunk dedicated entirely to life-critical activities. Nearly a quarter of your exam is now focused on the stuff that will literally save a life. We're talking electrical hazards, confined spaces, hazardous energy isolation, and rigging. The exam is absolutely demanding that you know how to intervene when the stakes are at their absolute highest.
Section 3, the job site reality check. STS versus STSC fieldwork.
All right, let's step out of the testing center and get back out onto the site, because theory goes right out the window the second the backhoe fires up. If you are working in construction, these focus areas are your daily reality: excavation, shoring, cranes, fall protection, and heavy equipment. General industry safety might teach you about machine guarding in a factory, sure, but it is not going to teach you how to properly slope a 12-foot trench in Type C soil. I've had jobs doing critical crane lifts over active roadways. In those moments, you need a superintendent who understands load charts, wind limits, and rigging inspections inside and out. The STSC validates that you actually know how to manage these specific, high-risk construction activities safely.
Let me give you a pro tip straight from my years as a super. And I want you to treat this like a morning tailgate talk. You need to know exactly what's happening in that trench before you send your crew down. General safety knowledge will not hold up a dirt wall, period. If your primary job involves earth moving, working at heights, or swinging heavy steel, the STSC is your credential. It shows your employer, your client, and most importantly, your crew that you aren't just a safety guy. You are a construction safety leader. You know their world.
Section 4. Choosing your path, making the right call. So, we've laid out the differences and looked at the job site realities. How do you actually make the final call? Well, I can tell you right now, cost isn't going to be the tiebreaker. The examination fee for both the STS and the STSC is exactly $185. Application and renewal fees, completely identical too. The BCSP has made sure that cost is simply not a factor here. Your choice should be purely based on the environment you actually work in. Are you in manufacturing, healthcare, or general services? Grab the STS. But if you are in the trades, get the STSC. Once you've picked your lane, the path to the finish line is exactly 3 steps. Step 1, you need to meet the eligibility requirements. That means either 2 years of supervisory experience, 4 years of general work experience, or a qualifying degree or apprenticeship. Step 2, you got to complete 30 hours of formal environmental health and safety training. And step 3, you have to sit down and pass that 100-question, 2-hour exam. Yes, it takes focus, but it is entirely within your reach. So I'm going to leave you with this question to really chew on. When your crew's lives are on the line, which certification will you rely on? Make the choice that actually aligns with your boots on the ground. Now that you know exactly which certification to target and why it matters, it is time to get your paperwork in order. Let's move smoothly right into our next module, where we're going to break down the exact documentation you need for step 1, how to prove your eligibility, and how to get your application approved without a hitch. Let's keep building.
All right, let's keep this momentum going. You've got a really solid grasp on the differences between the STS and the STSC from our last section, but now we actually need to talk logistics. I'm talking about the practical blueprint to transition from turning wrenches and hands-on tools directly into safety leadership. This is section 7 of our masterclass, the Eligibility and Application Blueprint.
Look, I've spent over 25 years walking job sites, and I've mentored hundreds of supervisors. I always tell my crews the exact same thing. Getting this certification is absolutely one of the smartest moves you can make for your career. And yeah, for your paycheck too. Earning your STS or STSC is how you prove to the higher-ups that you're ready to step up from purely hands-on roles into respected safety leadership. But before we can get you that hard hat sticker, we have to make sure you actually qualify.
Section 1, Decoding Eligibility Requirements, the foundation you need to qualify.
Think of this next part like pouring a foundation. The BCSP has strict requirements you absolutely have to meet before you can pull the permit to test. Notice the 2 different paths here. Path 1 is the supervisory path. If you've been running a crew, acting as a foreman, or holding down any supervisory role, you need a minimum of 2 years of that experience. Path 2 is the general work path. If you haven't been in a formal leadership role yet, no problem. You just need 4 years of general work experience in any industry, or specifically in construction if you're going for the STSC.
Now, here is a massive pro tip for you. I've helped so many guys who almost disqualify themselves before they even applied, just because they weren't working a standard 40-hour week year-round. I actually had a carpenter on my crew last year who thought his part-time hours didn't count. But listen, the BCSP explicitly states that part-time work absolutely counts toward these experience requirements, as long as you are clocking a minimum of 18 hours a week. So don't disqualify yourself before you even try. And hey, what if you don't have those years of raw field experience yet? Don't sweat it. The BCSP accepts alternative education to build that foundation. If you have an associate degree or higher in occupational safety, risk management, or construction management, you are completely covered. Or if you came up through the trades like a lot of us, completion of a formal 2-year trade program or a union apprenticeship counts just as well. So you've got your experience or your education locked in. Good. But there is a second mandatory requirement across the board for everyone. Every single candidate must document a minimum of 30 hours of formal safety, health, and environmental training. I get asked this literally all the time on the job site. What exactly counts for those 30 hours? Section 2. Documenting your experience. Proving your training foundation. This is where the paperwork comes in. The BSCSP needs you to actually prove this training foundation. Those 30 hours can be stacked up in a few different ways. An OSHA 30-hour card is a perfect example of a single comprehensive course that knocks it out in one go. But you can also piece it together using multiple individual safety classes, internal corporate training programs your company put you through, or even hours spent attending professional safety conferences. It all adds up, as long as you can document it. But listen to me on this one. You have got to keep your records. Put those certificates in a real folder at home. Don't just leave them sitting on the dashboard of your truck to fade in the sun. Section 3. The application process. Pulling your certification permit. Okay, so once your foundation is set and you have your experience and your 30 hours of training in hand, you'll log right into the BCSP website and create an account in their My Profile portal. Think of this portal like your digital clipboard. You'll go in and do 4 basic things. First, upload your proof of those 30 EHS training hours. Second, document your work or supervisory experience. Third, complete a background disclosure. And finally, pay the $120 application fee. I need to hit the brakes for just a second right here on step 3, the background disclosure, because I've seen some really good supervisors trip up on this. You must report any past criminal convictions or professional license suspensions. The BCSP independently reviews these for professional ethics. Listen to me, don't hide anything. As a safety leader, your integrity is everything. Be upfront, submit your paperwork honestly, and let them review it. Section 4, exam prep and resources. Building your study blueprint. These exams are technical, man. You really need to study. So here are your official tools for the toolkit. The BCSP offers their own exam core program for $499, giving you 6 months of access to over 500 practice questions. It's highly comprehensive. Now, if you're working with a different budget, Click Safety Span offers a workbook or online program starting at $75 or a bundle for $125. Click Safety also has a $300 live virtual workshop with a pass guarantee, meaning if you fail, you get to retake the workshop for free. Just choose the tool that fits your personal learning style. Now, if you're the kind of supervisor who just needs maximum practice reps to feel totally confident, Columbia Southern University offers a premium version of Exam Core that bumps the test bank up to over 1,000 questions. But a quick heads up for my veterans out there, these specific prep courses are generally not eligible for VA funding or military tuition assistance, so just plan your budget accordingly. Aside from the official courses, you can also grab independent prep guides like the ASP Exam Essential Practice and just keep it on your desk. These books dive deep into basic safety principles, industrial hygiene, hazard control methods, and they let you practice those tricky safety calculations that always seem to catch field guys completely off guard on test day. Once your application is officially approved, the BSCP gives you exactly 1 year to schedule, take, and pass the exam. The clock is ticking, so here's your practical timeline. Give yourself a solid 6 to 12-month prep period using Exam Core or Click Safety. Then, schedule your exam through Pearson VUE. Do not wait until month 11 to book your test. Pace yourself for sure, but get that Pearson VUE date on the calendar early so you have a hard, concrete deadline to work towards before your 1-year window expires. Section 5. Next steps for leaders. Crossing the finish line. When you finally sit down at that computer at the testing center, just remember this number, 100. The exam is exactly 100 multiple choice questions, and you have a 2-hour time limit to knock them out. Keep your cool, read the questions carefully, and just pace yourself. And here is the absolute best news I can give you today. You do not need to be perfect. The passing score for the STS and STSC is 70%. You just need to prove you have a solid, competent grasp of safety leadership. Hit that 70% mark, and you are walking off the job site a certified professional. But hey, let's be totally honest with each other. Sometimes really good people fail. If you don't pass on the first try, it's not the end of the world. You just wait 6 weeks to retake it. You'll get a diagnostic report showing exactly which areas you missed so you can fix your punch list before the next attempt. Plus, if you use BCSP's Exam Core program and failed, they actually offer a free 6-month access extension as a safety net. So don't panic, just reevaluate and reattack.
Once you pass, you enter a 5-year recertification cycle. To maintain your shiny new credential, you need to either complete 30 hours of new safety training over those 5 years or go ahead and earn an advanced credential like the CHST, ASP, or CSP. You also need to pay a $70 annual renewal fee. Keep up with your training and pay the $70 every year. Do not let all your hard work lapse over a simple fee. So, you've got the blueprint. You know exactly how to qualify, how to apply, and how to study. But let me leave you with this thought. Passing the test is literally just the beginning. A piece of paper doesn't magically make you a leader. Once you have those letters after your name, how do you actually handle a veteran crew that pushes back on your safety rules? What do real supervisors say about the gritty, day-to-day challenges of safety leadership out on the dirt? Well, that's exactly what we are going to dive into in the next section of our masterclass. Let's get right to it.
All right, we just wrapped up exam prep, so let's step away from the paperwork for a minute and get straight into the reality of the dirt, concrete, and steel. Section 8, the true safety leader. So I want you to really chew on this question for a second. Are you just responsible for safety, or are you actually leading it? You know, I've trained hundreds of supervisors over the last 25 years, and a lot of folks, they just show up on the job site thinking basic compliance is enough. They honestly think if nobody gets hurt today, they did their job. But out there on the line, simply being responsible is passive. Leading is active. Now, according to the BCSP, for a lot of candidates, safety is considered an adjunct, collateral, or ancillary responsibility. Fancy words, right? Basically, it means it's treated like a side gig while you're out there pushing production and trying to beat a tight schedule. But listen, just because safety is an adjunct duty on paper doesn't mean it takes a back seat. The modern job site completely relies on decentralized safety ownership, right there on the front line with you. A true safety leader owns it while they manage production.
Listen to what the Board of Certified Safety Professionals actually says about this. STS credential holders help to build the safety culture throughout their organizations and foster healthy workplaces. See, they aren't saying your job is just to write up reports. They're saying you build the culture. As a supervisor, your attitude literally dictates your crew's attitude. If you roll your eyes at a safety protocol, well, guess what? Your crew's going to ignore it completely. But if you take it seriously, they'll respect it.
In building that culture, it really comes down to mastering these core supervisor tasks. We're talking hazard monitoring, regulatory compliance, employee training, safety documentation, and coordinating corrections. Look, I know a lot of new supervisors stare at this list and just see a giant pile of administrative chores. But I need you to flip that mindset right now. These aren't just boxes to check. These are absolutely essential job site survival skills. Training a new hand properly, or keeping your documentation bulletproof, that's exactly how you protect your team from getting hurt and how you protect your company from massive liabilities.
To put this into perspective for the test, the STS-5 exam blueprint, which goes into effect in March 2026, tells a really clear story about exactly where your focus needs to be. Domain 6, life-critical activities, is the absolute heaviest at 22%. Then you've got hazard awareness and hazard controls sitting at 20% each. Domain 1, safety program implementation, is 15%. So what's this data actually telling us? Well, it means almost 2/3 of the new exam is intensely focused on you out there directly identifying hazards, controlling them, and managing life-critical, high-risk work.
All right, let's dive into Domain 2, Mastering Hazard Awareness. Recognizing hazards before they turn into incidents, that is a supervisor's absolute most crucial daily mission. So how do we actually do it? Step 1 is running proper safety inspections. You've got to walk the site with your eyes wide open. Step 2 is documentation-based hazard identification. Now, this is actually a specific new knowledge requirement in the 2026 blueprint. You need to review audits, reports, and logs to spot those sneaky trends that aren't obvious just by looking around the yard. And step 3? Oh man, this is the big one. Execute Stop Work Authority. SWA. I literally cannot stress this enough. When things don't look right, say a trench isn't shored correctly or a scaffold looks sketchy, you must have the backbone to stop the job. Period.
Moving on to Domain 3, implementing hazard controls. Because, let's face it, just pointing out a problem is only half the battle. You have to take decisive action to actually fix it.
Here's the practical breakdown. Step 1, you assess the risk. Step 2, you apply the hierarchy of controls. Trying to eliminate the hazard first, rather than just slapping some PPE on your crew and calling it a day. And step 3, continuously improve the job safety analysis. Let me give you a little piece of mentoring advice from my own time in the field. Do not write a JSA in your truck and just hand it to the crew to sign on the hood. Do it with them. When you continuously update those JSAs with the actual men and women doing the heavy lifting, it builds immense trust and respect. They know you're actually listening. Next up, Domain 6, life-critical activities. At 22% of the new blueprint, mastering this domain is absolutely non-negotiable. These are the high-risk physical hazards you're going to be tested on. Electrical, confined spaces, fall hazards, hazardous energy isolation, meaning lockout-tagout, ladder safety, and hoisting and rigging. Speaking from 25 years of working in the dirt, guys, these are the fatal hazards. I once saw a guy skip a lockout-tagout step on a live panel just to save 5 minutes. Catching that? It didn't just enforce a rule, it literally saved his life that day. That is the reality of this domain. Your direct intervention saves lives.
Now here is a pro tip that ties right back into Domain 1. Monitor employee fitness for duty directly on the front line. The 2026 exam explicitly includes monitoring employee fitness for duty as a knowledge requirement. So, out in the field, what does this actually look like? It means really checking in with your crew during the morning huddle. Are they exhausted? Are they distracted? Are they physically ready for a high-risk task today? Checking their fitness for duty sets a standard of care, and it sets the tone for the entire shift.
This idea perfectly captures why your role is so incredibly vital right now. Modern organizations are integrating safety directly into operational workflows by training frontline leaders. You are the absolute key to the modern safety landscape. Safety isn't just some separate department anymore. It's an operational workflow, and you're the one running the operation out there.
As we wrap up this section, I really want you to remember this. True safety leadership means earning respect, not just checking boxes. Earning the STS credential proves you have the knowledge, sure, but taking ownership of your site, communicating honestly with your crew, and having the guts to step in when things go wrong, that proves you have the leadership.
So, I'll leave you with one final question to chew on. Are you ready to prove your leadership on test day and, more importantly, out there on the job site? Think on that as we move directly into our final recap of this explainer, where we're going to tie everything together to ensure you are fully prepared for the STS exam. Let's jump right in. All right, picking right up from what we just heard those supervisors say about safety leadership, we are officially rolling into our final toolbox talk for this masterclass. This is your STS exam mastery and game plan. Look, we've laid the foundation, we've poured the concrete, and now we're looking right at the finish line. I've been a site superintendent for over 25 years, and I've trained hundreds of guys just like you. So let's lock in, get focused, and build your absolute best strategy for conquering this exam. So, are you ready to knock out this final punch list? I know you guys out there are pulling 12-hour shifts, you're battling the weather, and you're managing 100 moving parts on site every single day. Seriously, I respect the grit it takes to sit down with this explainer after a long day just to better yourself and protect your crew. Here's how we're going to wrap this up. We'll quickly recap the test blueprint, we'll break down the actual exam math to completely kill any test anxiety you might be holding on to, and then we'll finalize your field tactics for test day. I want you to think of this exam blueprint exactly like your site map. The Board of Certified Safety Professionals divides this test into 6 specific domains. Now, I want you to notice where the heavy lifting actually is here. Hazard awareness, hazard controls, and life-critical activities. Those 3 areas alone make up over 60% of your entire exam. And honestly, that is your daily dirt and grit right there. That's inspecting gear, running a JSA, and executing stop work authority. The other sections like safety program implementation, emergency preparedness, and basic industrial hygiene, they're really just asking you to apply that daily field knowledge in a more systematic way.
Now pay close attention to this shift happening with the new STS5 blueprint, which takes effect March 1, 2026. The absolute biggest change on the job site for this new exam is in Domain 6.
It used to be all about ethical leadership, but now it is entirely focused on life-critical activities, carrying a massive 22% weight. We're talking about the fatal four here: fall hazards, confined spaces, electrocution, and lockout/tagout. They've also added fitness for duty evaluations over into Domain 1 and identifying hazards based on documentation into Domain 2. What this means is the BSCP is adapting this test to focus heavily on the high-risk hazards you actually face in the dirt today to keep your people alive.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about the test math. I promise you, knowing these numbers is going to completely kill any lingering exam anxiety. When you finally sit down at that computer at the testing center, you are going to face exactly 100 multiple-choice questions. That is it. There are no essays to write, no tricky fill-in-the-blank questions to stress over. It is literally just you, the computer screen, and 4 choices. And the best part, only one of them is right.
And you have exactly 2 hours to get the job done. If you do the math on that, it gives you well over a full minute per question. Think about it. Out in the field, you're making split-second, life-or-death decisions about crane rigging and trench shoring all day long. 2 hours is plenty of time. So the absolute best piece of advice I can give you here is simply don't overthink it. Read the question, rely on that boots-on-the-ground experience you already have, pick the safest, most logical answer, and just keep moving forward.
Now here's a really crucial point about how those 100 questions actually work. 13 of them are unscored pilot questions. Pearson VUE sprinkles these in just to test out new material for their future exams. The catch is, you will have no idea which 13 they are. So listen to me right now. If you get hit with a question that seems completely weird, totally out of left field, overly complex, or like it was literally written in another language, do not sweat it. It might just be a test dummy. Don't let one weird question ruin your rhythm or shake your confidence.
And here is the absolute magic math that should kill your panic for good. If 13 of those questions are thrown out as dummies, that leaves you with 87 active scored questions. Out of those 87, your magic passing number is 61. You only need to answer exactly 61 questions correctly to walk out of there with a passing score. That's right around a 70%. Once you realize that you can comfortably miss over 20 questions and still walk away with your credential, well, it becomes a highly achievable target for any seasoned supervisor.
Let's lay out your specific field tactics for exam day. Honestly, treat this exactly like prepping your tools before a major concrete pour. Step 1. You need to arrive at the Pearson VUE Testing Center at least 15 minutes early. Rushing in there sweating and stressed out is going to completely throw off your headspace. Step 2. Familiarize yourself with the approved TI-30XS calculator. If you don't bring a physical approved one with you, don't worry. There's a free digital one right there on the screen. And any math formulas you need, they'll actually be embedded right in the questions. Step 3. If you hit a tough question, just use the computer system to flag it and move on. Knock out all the easy ones first to secure those 61 points, and then just loop back around to the hard ones with whatever time you have left.
All right, let's briefly look past the test itself to the long game. Earning this credential is the hard part, for sure, but maintaining it is where a lot of guys accidentally slip up. Once you pass, you've got a $70 annual renewal fee to keep it active. Beyond that, there is a 5-year recertification cycle where you're required to log continuous safety training, stuff like attending safety conferences or completing online quizzes. And here is a massive heads up. The BCSP recently changed this schedule. Your recertification worksheets are now strictly due before March 1st. Guys, please do not let all this hard work expire just because you missed a paperwork deadline.
Let's just talk mentor to supervisor for a second here. Holding this BSCP credential, which is accredited by both the NCSCA and ANSI, carries some serious weight in this industry. It is absolutely not just a participation trophy. When you have STS after your name, it immediately communicates a high level of professional credibility to your employers, to the site owners, and most importantly, to your crew. It proves that you have successfully transitioned from just being technically skilled with your tools to being a true safety leader who can spot hazards, manage compliance, and proactively protect the men and women working under you. It is a real mark of pride.
Because at the end of the day, that is the real human reason we are doing all of this. The ultimate goal isn't just passing a test or scoring a pay bump, though, hey, those are definitely nice. But the real goal is ensuring that the brand new apprentice who just started last week
And the 30-year veteran operating the tower crane both get to pack up their trucks, drive home, and sit at the dinner table with their families tonight. Your knowledge of the hierarchy of controls, of lockout/out, of stop work authority, that knowledge is literally the shield that protects them.
You have put in the time. You know this material inside and out. And you have the real-world experience out in the dirt to back it all up. You've totally got this. I want to personally congratulate you on finishing this masterclass and taking such a massive step forward in your career. Trust your gut, remember that magic number 61, and go absolutely crush that exam. So, the only question I have left for you is, with all these new tools in your belt, how are you going to lead your crew tomorrow? Thank you so much for letting me guide you through this explainer. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more safety training and leadership strategies, and as always, stay safe out there.